We continue today's playlist from the original Game Boy video, which you can check out in the link cards above. While the Game Boy Pocket was a smaller and lighter revision, the Game Boy Color is the true successor of the original Game Boy, featuring improved ergonomics, a smaller and lighter form factor that came with an increase in power. With the release of the Game Boy Color in 1998, Nintendo finally delivered on players' most requested feature, a vibrant color screen. The new LCD was capable of displaying striking colors even in direct sunlight, and its backwards compatibility meant that owners could play both beloved classics and the new titles in color with no motion blur. On top of that, the Game Boy Color also included an infrared communication port, allowing gamers to play wirelessly with their friends or trade Pokémon without the use of cables. Although this 8-bit handheld wasn't quite the next-gen device, it still offered plenty of reasons for gamers to purchase it again, and millions did just that. The Game Boy Color went on to be an incredible commercial success, selling nearly as many units as the original Game Boy in a fraction of the time. With its improved design, features, and growing library of excellent games, the Game Boy Color packed a lot of portable fun in a small package. But if you were hoping for an even more powerful handheld capable of running classics ported from an earlier 16-bit systems like the SNES without compromise, you would have to wait until 2001 to pick up a Game Boy Advance. And if you wanted a backlit display, you would have to wait an additional 2 years longer for a Game Boy Advance SP revision, which is actually one of my favorite handhelds of all time. We'll be exploring both these devices in the next videos in this playlist, so look out for that. As discussed in our previous video, when the Game Boy first debuted in 1989, its hardware was easily overshadowed by competing devices, even back then in the 80s. However, this strategic move, inspired by Gunpei Yokoi's philosophy of lateral thinking with withered technology, proved a stroke of genius. By keeping costs low and delivering excellent battery life and plenty of timeless classic interchangeable games, Nintendo quickly became a dominant force in the handheld market, and went on to sell an impressive 118 million units. Despite its success, the Game Boy's technology remained largely unchanged from its launch and was in need of an upgrade. Titles like Rare's iconic Donkey Kong Land that released in 1995 had already pushed the Game Boy to its limits. And the popularity of Pokémon Red and Blue provided Nintendo with the perfect opportunity to modernize the device. So after more than 8 years of waiting, Game Boy fans were finally rewarded with the color screen they had long been wanting, especially since seeing earlier handhelds like the Sega Game Gear and Atari's Lynx were already equipped with these color displays. The Game Boy Color's new TFT LCD screen supplied by Sharp was the same resolution as its predecessor, but with an expanded palette of over 32,000 colors, capable of displaying up to 56 colors simultaneously. This, of course, was a massive upgrade from the original screen. Now, the new handheld also boasted an increased refresh rate that provided sharper graphics and addressed some of the blur issues that the original Game Boy suffered from. Thanks to its backward compatibility, new owners at launch had access to an extensive library of existing titles, plus an additional 576 games that would be released over the following 4 years. However, it is important to note that the only 4 Game Boy Color exclusive titles could not be played on the original, or the Pocket version like the dual system compatible releases could. To help differentiate colored exclusive titles from cross-platform releases, Nintendo made them without a notch in the top corner. That's why if you attempt to insert a color game pack into the original Game Boy, the power switch won't engage because it simply cannot slide over the cartridge. This clever design also helped owners of both systems easily identify which games would only play on the Game Boy Color at a glance. The original Game Boy is well known for its fantastic battery life thanks to its 4 AA batteries. However, with the Pocket revision only having space for 2 AAA batteries, which resulted in only around 10 hours of playtime. Still a lot compared to its competitors, but less than the original. Good thing we had an AC adapter to allow countless hours of gaming for being plugged into the wall, but to remedy this, for those who were unable to set up a tent next to a wall socket, Nintendo increased the battery size to 2 AA batteries, which offered 3 times the capacity of 2 AAA batteries that were present in the Game Boy Pocket. This was accompanied by a hardware overhaul, doubling the CPU speed from 4 MHz to 8 MHz, and quadrupling the memory from 8 KB to 32 KB of system RAM. This extra processing power gave developers the ability ability to create games that felt larger and smoother than was ever previously possible. In addition, classics like Link's Awakening, Tetris, and Wario Land 2 were re-released in color-enabled versions. These versions allowed gamers to enjoy them in full color, even though with backwards compatibility, gamers could select one of the 12 built-in color palettes to play the older game packs with an enhanced color and no blur. But don't be confused, the Game Boy Color just simply wasn't a better way to play classics. It also boasted plenty of its own great titles, such as Wario Land 3, Donkey Kong Country for fans of the SNES version, Dragon Quest III, Kirby's Tilt and Tumble, and Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, as well as many others. While Nintendo's strong game IP drove a lot of sales of the original Game Boy, third-party offerings also played a significant role in bolstering its successor's success. So if you're looking for some great Game Boy Color games to play, then these three will likely be on your list. Firstly, it wouldn't be right to talk about the Game Boy Color without discussing Pokémon's debut into the world of color itself. Pokémon Gold and Silver continued the popular franchise mechanics of capturing and battling, while evolving the gameplay with new features and items, which Pokémon could now hold. The game also featured fresh animations, a new region, story, and rival. It seems like yesterday I was aimlessly wandering around the city trying to find a watering bottle because Sudowoodo was in my way. Pokémon Crystal followed later with some additional quest lines, quality of life improvements, and additional Pokémon to catch. Gen 2 sold over 23.74 million copies, making it the third best-selling entry in the Pokémon franchise to date. So saying it is a success story is quite an understatement. Secondly, The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages are the 7th and 8th installments in the series, released in 2001. They retain the familiar controls, sound, and graphics, building on Link's Awakening game engine, which was re-released on the handheld as Link's Awakening DX. These titles provided captivating and rewarding experiences through their puzzle and battle-heavy adventures. What's more, the interconnection of the two games through a linked password extended replay value by allowing gamers to play them in reverse order after completion. Unsurprisingly, both of them sold over 4 million units each. Happy to hear that they are coming to the Switch Online later this year, making the Switch the new ultimate device for hardcore Zelda fans still holding on to their Wii U's. Finally, we have Metal Gear Ghost Babel as a classic overhead 2D action-adventure game with stealth-based gameplay, exclusively designed for the Game Boy Color. Set 7 years after the events of the first Metal Gear, which came out in 1987, this serves as an alternative sequel that delivers a rewarding tactical espionage experience. As Solid Snake, you'll be able to crawl, hide, and sneak around, utilizing an extensive arsenal of tools and weapons to support the intense and challenging gameplay. Missions are divided up including rankings based on time, kill count, time spotted, and rations used as categories. Plus, there's a two-person versus mode where you can engage in hide-and-seek matches against another player. Although it is a standalone game, Metal Gear Ghost Babel remains one of the best Game Boy titles and a must-play for both newcomers and veteran fans of the franchise. The Game Boy Color was more than just a bridge between the original and the Game Boy Advance. It helped solidify Game Boy as a go-to name for portable gaming. Although there is some debate over whether the Game Boy Color was an upgraded revision or a true next-gen device, the Game Boy Color offered a number of substantial improvements over the original. To put this into perspective, the Game Boy Advance SP may have brought with it enhanced features, but it was essentially an improved Game Boy Advance with the same library and hardware specifications. The Game Boy Color, however, did not only have improved capabilities, but numerous exclusive titles that could only be played on the Color. This was also shown when developers took advantage of the Color's better capabilities. Take Donkey Kong Land, for instance. It pushed the original Game Boy to its limits, but the Game Boy Color enjoyed an ambitious port of Donkey Kong Country from the SNES. Both are amazing games, but this difference is a testament to how developers were able to leverage the Game Boy Color's superior hardware. Many parents bought the Game Boy Color so their kids could play Pokémon with their friends, and for many of us, playing the Game Boy in the car or after school or late at night was a large part of growing up. Its ability to colorize your classic Game Boy titles with the unbeatable combination of affordability, fun games, and meaningful innovation, easily fended off competitors like the Sega Genesis's Nomad and Bandai's WonderSwan, and even the SNK's Neo Geo Pocket Color. All three sought to gain traction, yet couldn't quite dent the success of the Game Boy Color. However, the ultimate knockout punch finally came when Nintendo launched the 32-bit Game Boy Advance less than 3 years later, which was true to its name as it was much more advanced in terms of its hardware, with improved graphics, stronger battery life, and full backwards compatibility with an existing library of, at this point, over 1,500 games. By not wanting to retire the Game Boy Color before releasing the Advance, Nintendo strategically secured its standing as the undisputed king of the handheld market, and remained uncontested until Sony's PlayStation Portable arrived several years later. Interestingly, Sony's acquisition of Ericsson also prevented the Atari Lynx designer R.J. McCall from launching the Red Jade, a powerful 3D-capable handheld that was collaborating with Ericsson at the time, leaving Nintendo's reign pretty much unchallenged. Today, the Game Boy Color remains an important part of our youth, an iconic piece of gaming history, and a must-play for retro gamers everywhere. The backwards compatibility and releases that were compatible with both systems definitely blurred the lines, but it's still widely considered a true successor. So what do you think? Was it a turbocharged version of what you already had, or was the new handheld worthy of the 5th gen status? Share your favorite Game Boy Color memories in the comments section below, and I'll see you next time. Subscribe to the channel if you like the content, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss an upload.